All right, hello everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion about sustainable for building and maintaining the open web. I would like to welcome the three panelists that will certainly provide an insightful perspective around the topic of sustainability and the open web. So maybe we can already start with Shimalaya. Who are you and what brings you to the panel?
Hi, I'm Shamla. I'm the CEO of Unimity Solutions and been an integral part of the Drupal community for over 10 plus years. I think one aspect of being in the panel, most important aspect, is that it's so awesome to be in these COVID times in a virtual panel, and that too at DrupalCon Europe, and it brings such very good fond memories of my many Drupal conferences, and just meeting a few of you here is already energizing me. Nevertheless, I think the topic is very exciting, and I'm looking forward to hearing all the different perspectives from everybody in this very thoughtful topic on sustainable practices and open web.
Thanks a lot. Let's continue with Philip. So who are you and why do you care about sustainability and the open web?
My name is Philip Meller. I'm the lead engineer at Amazy Labs, Zurich. And in this position, my main concerns are architecting a sustainable development process. So I'm coming very much from the engineering angle on how to sustain development teams and providing value. But I'm aware that this topic is very broad, so I'm interested what else are the perspectives on sustainability in open web and open source.
All right, thanks a lot. And Laura, please introduce yourself and what would you like to get out of today's panel?
Hi, so my name is Laura Gaetano. I'm a designer and developer, and I've been working a little bit with open source and leading a worldwide program to get to bring more diversity and inclusion into open source. So I guess my perspective comes from both the open source world outside of the Drupal community and also specifically the idea of diversity and inclusion and as well everything that has to do with the nonprofit world. So how we can be sustainable and how we can kind of reuse bits and pieces of the work that we do for community events. So, and the other thing that I'm interested in specifically, or why I was interested in speaking at the panel, is that I've been out of the conference circuit for a little bit now. And so I'm really excited to kind of get excited about meeting people at conferences and find out more from the perspectives of Drupal contributors and people who are sort of outside of the community that I've been a part of, so the Ruby and Rails communities. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. I'm excited to have you all. My name is Josef Kruckenberg. I recently joined Leap as a product owner. And in the past, I've been an active contributor to Drupal in code, but also a lot in events organization. And I think sustainable practices are important for me when working with development teams or with open solutions overall. I think it's great when we are able to collaborate openly together with the clients as well. And especially in project work, I've seen a lot of mistakes happening because of, let's say, short-term perspectives. So that's why I want to explore ideas of how we can make things more sustainable. Okay, so because the terms open web and sustainability are rather broad and maybe not super well defined, I would like to take a quick opportunity to hear your definition of the open web and sustainability. Maybe we can start with Shimalaya again.
I think you're very right. Open web is such a broad perspective, and right here in this panel, we are all each probably representing different perspectives as it is. So I just wanted to simplify this and explain it with an analogy. If you take the analogy of a public park versus a paid member-only club, a public park actually allows the visitors to use the park, and just anybody can use the park. Anybody can host a stall inside the public park. Whereas the private member-only club, the club dictates the rules. So similarly, I think the open web is like the public park, where it's about making it an equitable place for all its users. The stall owners are the content publishers, and the visitors are the content consumers. And in the public park, it's important to make the place very safe for all its users and stall owners and visitors. And this is the same when it comes to the open web, and hence privacy and security are one of the very key aspects of the open web. And I think especially with COVID and all the turn in our lives, more and more users are accessing the internet and the web. Ensuring that privacy and security are there will ensure that the users feel safe. Over and above privacy and security, the open web does include accessibility, interoperability, and other concepts. And with this freedom and openness, the public park actually relies more on the responsibility of its users to make sure that the park is used judicially, it's not misused. Whereas the private clubs can enforce many of these rules and dictate how the facilities are being used. Similarly, with the open web, I think with all this freedom and openness, there's also the important concept that we all need to be responsible as the users of the open web and adhere to these best practices. So just wanted to highlight that along with what is required for an open web, the most important aspect is that with all this freedom and openness is the need for responsibility. And yeah, why do I care about this? And how do we make this more sustainable? I think the important aspect is that there should be a lot more awareness. People should be aware of what this means, and many of the role that I come in from, wherein we build a lot of solutions and technical solutions. Understanding these concepts and actually implementing them itself is a way that we are demonstrating responsibility towards the open web. Yeah.
Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with what has just been said. But when I think of the open web, I think my first thoughts go towards decentralization and inclusion. So these are two topics that have already been brought up to a certain extent. Yeah, I think decentralization, because we need to think about also the users of the open web and where they all, so decentralization in the context also of accessibility. So where they all access the open web from, what possibilities do they have, what things do they need in order to use the open web, in order to create on the open web, is one thing that I think about a lot. And again, inclusion is, has been brought up in the park and the club analogy. I think it's very interesting that when we talk about the open web and inclusion in the context of the open web, we need to consider the fact that sometimes in order to have a space that is truly open, we need to put some restrictions in place. And when I talk about restrictions, I talk specifically, for example, about, say, in communities, codes of conduct, and things that allow the people that are truly the marginalized ones, the ones that don't usually get the access, don't usually get the possibilities to speak, or to have the freedom to create in a particular community, to give them the possibility to actually to actually create and to actually use the open web. So these are, I guess, the two things that I'm thinking about a lot. With decentralization, it also means that we need to think a little bit about the tools that we're using, the tools that we're promoting as well. And I think that's also where open source comes into play. If we think about what software we decide to promote or to contribute to or to use. So all in all, the open web sort of a place without gatekeepers, but still keeping in mind that we need to be responsible, as has already been said, with our powers and with our behavior on the open web.
Thank you. Philip, what's your definition of the open web and sustainability, and why do you care about it?
Well, I think everything has been said about the open web right now, and I won't try to come up with a better analogy than the park. I think it's great. I would rather like to quote it at some point. And I think sustainability is very deeply connected with the openness and the way how we define value inside the open web. So to keep up our park and keep it sustainable, we have to define and maintain the value of the park to its to the people that earn money in there, and also to the people that come to visit it. And I think that's where we are falling short a lot of times, because we treat all of this as free and given, and thereby we open the gates for people that try to abuse it.
And for the others, what are the main challenges that you see for sustainability and the open web? Maybe we can start with Laura.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Philip made a really great point when he talks about maintainability, mainly because so it's great to create something, and it's a little bit harder to maintain it, or it's not as exciting to maintain it. I'd like to maybe use the example of open source again, because that's one thing that I'm fairly comfortable with. If you think about creating a new piece in an existing software that you're working on, it's always more exciting to kind of get the fresh new technology and build something new and make it exciting and just build everything from scratch and think about the architecture from scratch. And it's much, much harder to work with something that is already existing, that needs to be maintained, where maybe pieces need to be updated. And it always creates a challenge when the software is open source, to make decisions on whether we want to continue maintaining something or whether we want to kind of tear it down and build something new. And yeah, so I would see it as one of the main challenges of sustainability, is actually deciding when do we keep maintaining something and when do we tear it down and kind of build something new, or when do we decide to to maybe put more work into actually the care work and the maintaining work, which is the less exciting part of open source, to be perfectly honest. Like in my opinion, like tending to issue trackers and making sure that things aren't outdated and all that is like not super exciting, but it makes sure that the thing works. And so maybe that's also a place where we need to think about investing financially as well, or or teaching people that it's an important part of the ecosystem. Yeah, I think I'm basically building on top of what Philip has already said, but that's one of the main challenges that I see with sustainability.
Thanks.
Yep.
Shimalaya, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think, again, just building on the conversations, I think value that the open web brings is very important, the point that Philip highlighted. And I think open web does not necessarily mean no cost, right? It only means that even if there is a ticket to the solution, it is equitable. It's the same for every user, right? So we need to create a fair place where there is value that is getting created for the content providers as well as the content consumers. And only if there is value can there be innovation, there can be new ideas, and there can be it can be sustainable. So I think the important aspect is that we should not confuse openness with free. There needs to be a mechanism for people to monetize. There has to be organizations that are benefiting from it. There needs to be money that gets generated so that more of it can then get replowed back into finding answers for these solutions. But it's more the approach and the practices and the way these are executed that the open web stands for. And to make it sustainable, the value component is definitely a very important aspect.
Thanks a lot. So what strategies have you implemented to create sustainable solutions for the open web? What has helped you in the past already? Laura?
Yeah, so documenting everything. Yeah, that's not something that is always particularly exciting to do, even though I'm very excited when I get to write up a new process or something and document it all, because I love documentation. But I truly think that documenting things, processes, or tools and how we use them in an organization or in a community, documenting how we do things in a community is a very good first step towards building sustainable practices, simply because it allows us to, when faced with a problem that we've already faced before, to maybe be able to use a similar solution that has been used in the past. And again, I speak from the experience both of someone who has worked in open source and of someone who has worked in a nonprofit and a small company. So there is often high turnaround, or people come to the project, people leave the project. And it's very important to have as much as possible documented so that the stuff that happened, that we've done 4 years ago that worked, isn't kind of lost in the ether, like once the person that worked on it leaves the project for whatever reason. So yeah, documentation has been like my main way. And I know that for a lot of developers, there's the idea that code documents itself and that it doesn't need to be documented. And maybe this is something a bit, yeah, that some developers might disagree with me on, but I think that code doesn't document itself. I think it needs to be documented, and it needs to be explained, especially for the people who don't understand the code. So yeah, that's basically my the main thing that I've found. Maybe as an example, if I have a little bit of time, I was working on Rails Go Summer of Code, which is a project that is now defunct. And the idea of Rails Go Summer of Code was to bring a diverse set of contributors to open source. And we did so by funding teams to work on open source projects 3 months out of the year, through sponsorships and all that from companies. And the project now doesn't exist anymore, but we've done such a great amount of work when it comes to reaching out to sponsors, reaching out to mentors and coaches, reaching out to open source projects, and all that work that has been done is now, sitting somewhere unused. And I've been thinking a lot about whether other communities could actually benefit from this knowledge. So I think the passing of knowledge as well between communities is another thing that can help us as communities to be more sustainable. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I remember even Amacy sponsored Rails Girls Summer of Code events. So thanks for your efforts there. Philip, what's your practices?
Yeah, I also don't think that code documents code. I think the tests document code. And I think Agile already tells us how to work in a sustainable way. Unfortunately, this has been lost somewhere in translation. And I think that the most important practice of Agile is test-driven development. And we're not just talking about writing a unit test for every method on our class in this case. But I think this has to start at the very top level where so test-driven development says that you don't write production code without a failing test. And you should never implement a feature without a failing requirement. So you always should just build the smallest possible thing that will solve the problem at hand and not try to over-engineer. And we're very bad at this. At least from an agency perspective, we're very prone to trying to sell features and trying to build more and more stuff that will consume more and more resources on pretty much every side. So our users or our client needs like a homepage that is assembled of different sections that showcase the company, products, whatever. And very often I see this base assumption, okay, we're going to spin up a Drupal content management system with paragraphs and 53 types of paragraphs that allow the client to assemble every possible combination of homepage that they might need or not. And we're going to throw a Kubernetes cluster at this because we need 3 slave databases to power it up. And eventually this homepage changes 2 times a year. And the actually more sustainable solution would be that the client calls us and asks us, what do you think, how could we spice up the homepage a little to get more conversions? And that's where we're very prone to over-engineering and not building really sustainable solutions. So we should just stick to what do we need and build the smallest thing. And if it doesn't work, you can iterate. And that's the idea behind Agile. And I think that's what we need to do.
Thanks. How about you, Shimalaya?
Those are very interesting perspectives and very true too. I think making sure that you don't over-engineer, make things iteratively. What Agile brings to the table is definitely a sustainable practice. And the other side of it, looking at it, I think the solutions need to be viewed from the end user's perspectives. And even Drupal today, right? We've started to look at it from the user side, be it the editor, be it the end user. I think understanding their needs and tailoring the solutions. We recently built a large portal for a nonprofit, a transparency portal, which is a lot to do with the data that is available in the portal. Making sure that it's not just enough if we bring in all the reports and the data, but the user must be able to understand the data, create meaning, make it easy for the user to find. So bringing in practices which engages the end user, which keeps the user in mind, will then ensure that those solutions can further extend. Because when we have a solution that people can use, automatically there is a need for us to grow and make that solution better and better. So I think making it user-centric is a very important aspect. And not to mention that, almost all our implementations are centered around the best practices, because be it documentation, testing, security, privacy, it's important that it is not kept as a requirement by the client, but it is default in the way we do things, so that again, make sure that whatever we build out is vendor agnostic, it is more sustainable, and it's easy to bring in the innovation from the other, the open web, open source world, and make the solution more scalable. Yeah.
Thanks. I've looked into play, and Theodore submitted something that I would like to share. So he said that Dries was talking about corporate sponsorship, for contribution in the keynote, and the importance it has to endure access for non-white dudes. Think of his way seeing this problem. Do you think that the open web can thrive in a capitalist world? And I would like to add a comment of a colleague today in the morning. We talked about the session. He said, it's simple. Public money has to be public code. Yeah, so maybe you could share your thoughts about, we all live in a capitalist world. We have to fund the time. And how does it play into the open web and sustainability? Please raise your hand if you want to go first. Otherwise, I'll pick. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So I was actually thinking about the financial aspect when Philip, brought up Agile and said we need to start thinking about, dealing with the smallest pieces and just doing small iterations. But of course, when you're working for an agency, it's very difficult to, as an agency, kind of say, okay, we're going to deal with make like the smallest project possible, because that's going to bring in perhaps like the smallest amount of revenue, and that's good for us as an agency, right? I mean, that's kind of simplifying the problem a lot. But that was something that I was thinking about a little bit when he brought up the idea of working in an agile way, and how we've forgotten what working in an agile way is. But maybe to go back to the question of Theodore, so with Rails Girls Summer of Code specifically, and again, I'm using that example because it's something that I'm comfortable with and that I know, we did have to make a decision there. And the decision was, well, we want to enable people to work on open source projects. And the only way in which we can do that is, especially because the more marginalized people are the people who are less likely to have time to contribute to open source. The only way we can do that is by paying them. And where does that money come from? And that's a very interesting question, because that money can either come from the community, and so we can do a fundraiser every year, which we've also done. We've gotten donations from individuals whose sole purpose in donating was to actually see the open source communities kind of become more diverse and more inclusive. So they didn't have any other goal in mind, or like a hidden agenda or something, I guess, at least. But then we've also taken in money from companies, and there we always had the question, okay, like where do we draw the line? And if we accept money from a certain company, what does that mean for the program? And do we have to decide on a set of values that we want to have? And if we see that these companies very strongly go against these values that we've set for ourselves, then maybe we don't want to accept their money. And I think this is a very difficult question. I mean, it's obvious that the open source communities need money, and that we can't keep asking for free labor from people, because if we constantly do so, we automatically, I think, exclude a large portion of the population that is just unable to work on open source for free. And so I think we need to kind of decide, either we need to come up with certain ideas as communities on what our sets of values are and how we want to kind of decide whether or not we take money from companies, or we need to just be okay with the fact that even if you take money from, and I'll say like a bad company, I'm air quoting this, I don't know what a bad company is, but we need to be okay with the fact that we're taking money from that company and then using it for the greater good. And so I think this is a decision that needs to probably be taken, I mean, depending on, what community we're talking about, what project we're talking about, it needs to be made perhaps in a democratic way, or taking into account what the users want, what other people who associate themselves with the community want, and what impact it would have to take that money or not take that money. Yeah, I mean, this was like a lot of thoughts. So maybe Philip or Shamla can help kind of expand on this or go in another direction, maybe.
Would you like?
Yeah, I can go for it. So I think the very start, sustainable does mean, we need to have money there. Otherwise, it doesn't make things sustainable. So, and very rightly said, I think the open web is about setting the guidelines and the rules and the methodologies, which is fair and transparent, right? So that it means that there is equal opportunity for everybody. So it doesn't mean that we should exclude money. It's important that we set the guidelines and the rules, and it's important that we also get commercial backing, government backing, and maybe freelancers and others who join in together to build this open web. It cannot be a fully free environment where, without money, I don't think this could be sustainable. But it's important that this is a guideline, and also a method to earmark responsible behavior and bad behavior, because it's important to also identify the bad players versus the good players in certain ways, because that's what sets the fair play area for everybody. So sustainable means definitely having money thrown in. We must have corporate backing. We must have governments backing us in building this. We must also not just limit ourselves to standards and best practices, but move towards guidelines and rules, which I think Laura did speak about, and make sure that we also bring in the responsibility dimension, and clearly have a mechanism to cherish the ones that are responsible and highlight those who are not responsible.
Philip?
So Philip, to you to conclude.
Yeah, so I don't like the word contribution a lot, because it has this connotation of altruism and idealism, and the things don't work sustainably, as you all said. At the Maisie Labs, I also try to reduce this notion of developers get time to contribute, because this does not make sense. Contribution should be part of the workflow, and it should not happen out of I want to be good to others, or I want to help others. It should come out of a need. So it should come out of the need to, I don't want to maintain this solution on my own, but perhaps somebody else can also need it and help me with that. And this also goes back to the test-driven development approach, where you shouldn't try to just build something because it's cool, or because you would like to, or because you want somebody else to like you, but because you're paid for it by a client. And because there is an economical need for this specific solution, and so you would build it. And to go back to the notion before of this iterative approach is not good for agencies, because we want to sell big projects. That's true. But I think this comes down to our sales problem, and the fact that we are misusing Agile as a kind of a way to reduce our own responsibility towards the client. So we just either we agree on a scope, and then we just tell the client, okay, we're going on time and material on this, and it's done when it's done, or you can stop us beforehand. But this way we put ourselves into a position where we don't incentivize ourselves for being responsible and for working sustainably, because ultimately we just want to squeeze as many hours out of the client as we can. And actually building a subpar solution helps us with that, as long as the client is not angry enough to leave us. We can just keep up with maintaining it for a lot of hours, and we rather, and this also is true for open source, and also goes into that direction of, because something is open, it is not free. We need to sell value. So even if we just build like a very simple solution for the client, if this benefits the client a lot, it should be enumerated accordingly, and you should be able to charge enough for yourself to make a living out of it. So billing by the hour ultimately is the arch enemy of sustainability, I think. Because this will always make you run after the next hour, trying to sell more scope so you can justify more hours. And it will never leave enough room for sustainability on all other fronts, either by even incentivizing you for not working in a sustainable way, and also all the other aspects of sustainability and the open web when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to security. These things are the first to fall short in this model.
Thanks. As a quick highlight, we got a few votes for the question that we sent out in the live poll. So 30% consider themselves as a contributor to the open web. Yes, very much. A bit more than 40% do it so occasionally. So a good number of people are contributing to the open web who are seeing this live. And a quarter of the people say not yet, but they would like to, and 6% say maybe in the future. So what advice would you give to anyone interested in making the open web more sustainable? Could we start with Laura? Or maybe interesting projects you would like to highlight is also something we could play out here.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we've talked about the need to, I think it was Philip who brought this up, who said we shouldn't create something just because it's cool, but because there's a need for it. And I think similarly, what I always advise to people who want to, and again, this is strictly for open source specifically, people who want to contribute, but I think we can extend it to wanting to contribute to the open web, is to actually find something that you're interested in or that you have a need for, because ultimately that's going to bring you some value. And if you're already sort of struggling to know where to start and maybe struggling to find the time, I think finding a project or a place that provides the most value for you personally is like your best bet. So I think that's the advice that I would give. I think there's lots of places online where to find sort of like-minded people. So I use Twitter a lot, for example, for finding, lists of people that I'm interested in following and seeing what they're up to. And I think that can also sometimes foster, like the networking aspect can foster a lot, sort of the willingness or interest in contributing to open source or to the open web. There's a project / conference that I've attended in the past called Sustain Summit, which was co-founded, I think, by Pia Mancini of the Open Collective. And there, so I mean, the summit that I attended was in person, and I don't know how they've kind of translated that into for COVID times into like a remote event, but it was extremely interesting because it gave people the possibility to really come together and to really kind of start working groups in order to think about sustainability on the web, in order to think about what projects they'd like to contribute towards or what problems they are seeing. And it was a fairly diverse set of people that attended. And so that project, maybe I'd like to kind of highlight and tell people to perhaps check it out and see if there is anything that might come up in the near future, a date or an online event, or who knows, an in-person event in 2021, 2022. Yeah.
So, looking at time, we're close to the finish. Philip, what would be your advice for anyone willing to contribute to the open web?
Don't undermine your own value. It's not easy to do, to get out of this vicious cycle of just trying to sell and sell more. But I think we collectively have to start to be able to do that. And perhaps I would like to answer one of the questions. Michael Lenahan asked what to use instead of contribution, because I said I don't like the word contribution. Mm-hmm. I like to call it just collaboration. So if we find something in open source software that we need to extend, we don't ask the client, are we allowed to contribute this or should we contribute this? It's just the most efficient way to collaborate with the maintainer and ask, what's your opinion? Should we bring this in as an extension or should we keep it on our own? And yeah, we try not to phrase it that way. You're muted.
Thanks. And to Malaya?
Yeah, I think just keeping the seconds in mind, I think we should, to make sure we are sustainably contributing to the open web, contributing or collaborating in the open web, we must definitely, look at what is the value that we can get. And just knowing that there are like-minded people solving the same problem always helps us to innovate better. I think the biggest value is innovation from this collaboration, and that's what we should look at as a motivation for us to then give back to the open web.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure to have you all on the panel. And I wish the attendees a good rest of the conference, and hopefully you're able to contribute sustainably. Cool. Bye-bye.